I'm Alice Anderson, a physical therapist, originally from Dallas. I worked for 25 years in the Hemophilia Treatment Center at Children's Medical Center, and have been very involved with the PT working group and teaching and developing materials for the NHF.
I'm Dave Rocheleau. I'm a social worker, and I live in Traverse City, Michigan. I'm in a 300-bed regional hospital and a hemophilia treatment center. Well, I've been at the hospital 32 years, but I've been in hemophilia for 24. I'm program coordinator, I'm the social worker, I'm the research coordinator. I kind of do jack of all trades because we're a small center. We have about 200 patients.
This project about intimacy came out of a study called the HERO study that was sponsored by Novo Nordisk. And it was a really big quality of life study that looked at concerns of people with hemophilia. Now here, we're going to kind of spread that to people with all different kinds of bleeding disorders because it's very similar. Through the study, NHF pulled out several topics that seem to be areas of concern for people with bleeding disorders. So today, the goal for us is to talk a little bit about intimacy and talk about what that means for you. Also look at the kinds of things that can help you form stronger, intimate relationships, as well as things that may cause bumps in the road, things that make intimacy hard, and maybe look at ways that we can make that a little less difficult for everybody. This is a great cartoon. It says, "I need to talk to you about how you don't understand my needs." And the woman says, "I need to not understand your needs, and that need is something that I need you to understand." Do you ever feel like this when you're talking to your partner? It's a part of the joys of a modern relationship. So when you think, oh, what do I want? I want intimacy. What does that mean to you? What's the first thing you think of when you hear intimacy?
My wife. Just for me, intimacy means two people. Specifically, it means my wife and I sharing our lives together in every way, and I truly believe. I mean, that's to me intimacy. It's not just about what everybody else sees. It's how her and I see each other and how we interact with each other.
So it's everything about how you interact with each other and the closeness that you have.
Absolutely.
Perfect. What else? Other thoughts?
Hugs and kisses.
So hugs and kisses mean intimacy. What else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I believe we're too old for this. Not saying everybody's real old, but what I'm saying
Speak for
is,
yourself.
but we had a young man come to us and a young girl come to us in our relationship, how we got married, why did we get married? Because she couldn't understand, she was a bleeder and he was a bleeder, but they were two separate individuals. She wanted to know, how does it last? You know, you're bleeding one minute, next minute she got to take care of you, or she got to run to the hospital, or she got to go to work or whatever. How does it work? The young man wanted to know, how do you get close to someone? Do you tell them right away you're a hemophiliac, or do you you hold off on it? And my best bet to him was to hold off on it, because you don't want that exposure right away. You want to know the person first before you expose anything that can be detrimental to you. Because if she tells and you didn't tell on the job, you're fired. Okay. I still think we're too old for this. We've been through the changes, the growing up period, the falling out period. But the young people that in their teens, early teens, late teens and 20s need that kind of feedback. They need to understand what they're doing, how they're doing it, and where they're going with it.
I don't know him. I just met him. I don't agree. I think it's for us. Because it seems like now that we're retired, I'm retired, he's been retired. But now that I'm a new retiree,
Congratulations.
I think it's just for us too. We're not too old because we have intimate problems too in our relationship. And I think we can learn a lot.
Yeah, we went from a king size to a queen size bed. I miss my king size bed.
You went from a king size to a queen size.
Yeah. Well, we downsized in the house. So we downsized everything.
That brings it closer together.
Yeah, right. I can't move.
So you touch her more easily.
How long have you been married?
40 years? Almost
We
40.
added that up yesterday.
40 years.
39.
I'm glad that you're here, and I personally don't believe that you are ever too old to talk about intimacy. And as we're beginning to find out, intimacy is just more than sex.
Yeah.
It's about communication, as you said, and it's about just talking with your wife and being with your wife, and it's everything that we do during the day. You know, we're taking risks with one another, and we're allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, and you're talking to complete strangers. So that in and of itself is a form of intimacy. Any other thoughts about intimacy and what it means for you and how you experience intimacy?
What do you think the very first thing the younger crowd said? Sex. Sex, exactly. And I think that makes sense for the younger group. One of the things that we talk to the younger crowd about is that there are different kinds of intimacy, and maybe through our discussion we can expand what you think intimacy might be and how that might apply to your life. As a jumping off point, let's look at what the book says intimacy is. You can decide whether it's right or wrong. Feeling close and connected, mutual respect and understanding, giving and receiving warmth, compassion, and support. And shared experiences. That's kind of what I heard when you were speaking, is living life together. You know, walking through the fabulous times, walking through the hard times, and you know what? Walking through just the regular times. Because there's just regular day-to-day life. So think about people that you interact with. How do you guys meet each other's needs?
I do everything he tells me to do.
Everything he tells you to do.
That's not true.
I think you should.
I was going to say, do you agree with that assessment? Do you think that? Do you feel like that?
It's the other way around, sure.
It's the other way around. I suspect that that's
Do this
pretty
and
normal.
I have to do that.
It's a life sentence with no chance for parole.
How long have the two of you been married?
Thursday will be our 43rd wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
But I met him when I was 15, and he was 17, so we dated for 8 years before we got married. We were high school sweethearts, and I've been damned ever since. No, truly, I live the life of a princess. He's
So what's kept you together for 43 years? That's astounding.
You know what? It's just we have the same interests. We enjoy each other's company. I had to retire, and he's still working. He's out of town at least 2 weeks a month. When he comes home on Friday, I am as happy as, because I really miss him.
That's really special and touching that you're able to say that after all these years. You're greeting Al at the door. That's
And so did
says a lot.
4 cats.
For the cat.
And 4 cats.
They're happy to see me too.
And Dana, are you married or single?
I have a boyfriend I've been with for a
You
while.
have a boyfriend, okay. So we're talking characteristics of relationships, 43 years. So love, trust, a lot of support. What else comes to mind when you think about, we've been together 40 years and you're married,
Yeah, I've
have a
been,
great relationship, it sounds like, with your wife.
14 years, but
14
we've been together
years.
for 17 years, I think. 17.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
She's
also
gonna
the
wake up
family
one
too,
morning.
right? So we have great kids. They grew up.
Family,
Oh, yeah,
You know.
families.
Yeah, our children are.
Yeah.
absolutely.
And we try to give them away every chance we get. No, we got.
Oh,
we got
when
three-
mine were that young, they were probably the same way.
Yeah, my 3-year-old, wow. No, we have 3 kids too also, and I mean, that
3
plays
kids.
a large part of all of that, because the support, you're supporting each other and taking care of the kids.
Right.
And the trust part also, I mean, you have to trust the other one. You have to trust the other one to make the right decisions for your children when you're not there. Because even though they're her kids too, you want to say in everything also. So you have to trust her. We have to support each other because, you know, it's us against them some days.
When you co-parent together and you're raising your families together, absolutely, you have to be in the same path, and you have to talk and communicate, and you may differ in your parenting styles. And so how do you compromise? It keeps your relationship growing, and just you're kind of canoeing in the same path, same river.
Dana, when you think about your partner, what are a couple of things that pop into your mind that help you feel close with your partner?
Trust and communication is always really important to me.
Trust and communication. Absolutely. Yeah. So, what makes it hard? Kids, I think, has been brought up a bit. That just makes things challenging. I know y'all love them, but they can be complications sometimes.
I think the complication and hard part comes in being unemployed.
So, talk to me about that.
Only if you have a bleed, the family stops until you get yourself together. And if you're working, you gotta be careful what happens. My son got ready to go to college, and then right after he graduated from high school, I lost my job.
Oh,
They
gosh.
forced me to retire because I had a bleeding episode. Bad enough to put me in the hospital for a couple of weeks. And then,
Oh.
so here he is ready to go to college, can't afford it.
Oh,
and,
gosh.
and all the weight's on her. So, you know, we made a decision. Hey, what would you like to do? I'm going to go to work at McDonald's. No, that's not going to work. So he ends up going in the Navy, but he liked the Navy. So he stayed there the whole time. He graduated, comes out of the Navy, an officer with a college degree, and he goes right back to the Navy after he retires, gets a job with him. So he's back on the base again.
So, you guys were facing a big problem,
Yes.
but together you were able to come up with a strategy that worked, where your son got an education and you were still able to pay the rent
Right.
or the mortgage.
Yeah.
That-
Maybe had a daughter, and she's younger than him, about 6 years. And then she had the children with the hemophilia. So both of her boys have hemophilia, severe, just like their grandfather.
So you're able to pass on that wisdom.
Plus, what I notice is the younger generation has their husband and wives. When I grew up, it was just mama and the children. The husbands couldn't take the pressure of a child with a sickness. And then, from what I see, everything's going fine now. 'Cause
And then
there's
your
too
mother
many-
was different,
Yes.
because she always encouraged you to work.
Yeah.
You didn't know about disability until you got older. You always, when I met Jerry, he was always working. He always had a job. So, I really didn't know he was sick either. You know, I just knew he yawned a lot. My mother used to say, why does he yawn so much? I said, I don't know, Mom. It's a bad habit.
It's pain pills. You take so many pain pills.
Oh,
that
gosh,
you,
yes.
You're just out of it until you make your mind up you're not going to take it anymore.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. I was taking pain medication 3 and 4 times a day. So one day I decided I'm not going to take it anymore.
So y'all have touched on several things that make relationships hard. Just the financial stress of having a member of the family with hemophilia, the difficulty in keeping a job when you have a bleeding disorder, the effects of being on pain medicine, which makes you tired. It's more difficult to participate with the family, or choosing not to take pain medicine, hurting, and
Doing what you got to do.
doing what you need to do, and also be there with and for the other people in your family, despite the fact that you're hurting. That's a lot.
Well, you got another thing too now. Remember now, we have to pay for this medicine. And if you don't have a decent enough job, you can't pay for it.
With coverage, right?
When I decided to get married, I had to make sure the wife understood. And I think she did that first, and then she said, yeah, I got it.
What are some other things that maybe we haven't talked about that make relationships hard in your lives?
In 2009 was the worst year of our marriage. I was diagnosed with breast cancer, stage 3. I had my surgery, I had the radiation tubes strapped to my back, and I get a phone call that I had lost my job. Not just me, but 30 other people. So I'm laying on the couch one day, because I was about to start chemo, and he comes home and he goes, Mira Jane, you're not going to believe this. I lost my job too.
Oh my goodness.
I think we became closer than ever before, since we were both going through this crisis. Thank God our kids had already gone through school, they had their, they were on their own and things like that, but it really was a test of toughness.
Sure.
So how did you guys negotiate through that with both of you losing your jobs?
That was my question,
Yes.
absolutely.
It was a lot.
We had severances, so, and then just took the summer off and spent the time by the pool. Had the best tan of my life, and then the pool shut down, and then things got boring. And I got a phone call from people that I had worked with from another company looking for my skills, and then we went and talked to them, and started with them part-time and then became full the next year.
How'd you get through that? Even though you had some financial support at that point, did it touch your relationship at all? Even though you said you grew a lot stronger, but how did it grow stronger?
Well, you just kind of sit back and you go, how much worse, and you should never say that. We had the support of each other, and our families are both very strong. I mean, they really were really good, and my kids, they got mad because when I was first diagnosed, it went a long time before I even tell them, because I just didn't want them to worry about me. They had their own lives to live. They were young, you know. I waited till I couldn't put it off any longer before I told them. And I just didn't want to see them have to fuss over me. I'm kind of stubborn that way, but I had him, and that's all I really feel I needed. And I have my faith.
I'm pretty stress-free, you know what I mean?
Yeah, he is. He really is.
I don't believe in getting too worked up. We did have severances, and I figured we had a good 6 months that we had to figure things out, you know. And the phone call came, and then I didn't even have to worry because I knew I had an opportunity.
So his ability to chill out through that,
Oh
did
my
it
God.
help or did it make you mad?
I can't have an argument with him. He'll just get up and, oh, I'm gonna get some coffee. I'm sitting there and I'm like yelling at myself because he just refuses to get frustrated or, you know, this too shall pass is his attitude. And he's right, it did.
Well, lucky, I mean. But
Yeah,
when
we've got
When you're
lucky.
60-year-old, not too many jobs come your way, so it was God. I guess he helped us out.
It looks like you guys have touched on several of these. Things that make being intimate difficult. We didn't really talk about decreased motion, but I suspect that that's kind of included in just having a bleed. Or does fear of a bleed keep you from doing things that you might want to do?
No. You do it, deal with it.
I've been working with people in the community for a long time, especially teenagers. But there are some people that are really afraid to do.
When I was a kid, my parents didn't wrap us in a bubble. You know, stuff that you just don't do nowadays. But anyway, my great-grandmother told my mother that when I was born, the best thing to do was lock me in a padded room if she wanted to have me around. That's what so anyway, my parents didn't do that. My mother and my father actually would push us out. We played baseball and sports, and you know, we pretty much did anything any other kid did except for like organized football because the doctor would never sign off on it, or my brother would have played. They just, you know, if we could do it, we tried it. If you're overly protective, it hurts you later in life, I think. And our parents, by pushing us out and telling us we weren't allowed to sit in the house in the summertime, we were told to get out. You go outside and you play, and as long as it wasn't something too dangerous, which was pretty much we did anything we wanted when it came to that, being outside playing, I think it allowed us to progress. But when it came time, like my wife and I, when we met, I told her about the hemophilia. I told her about the risk of our children, of my daughters being carriers, and the risk of our grandchildren having hemophilia. You know, I didn't want to hide that from her and say, oh, by the way, you know, after we'd been together for a long time. So I think it goes a lot into how you were raised. How your parents viewed the hemophilia is how you view the hemophilia, and then how you view it is how your spouse will view it. You don't let the disease control you, you control it, you know.
How do you think, being a female with a bleeding disorder, how do you feel like you're affected a little bit different than the men? Or do you think there is a difference?
I think that I have issues with getting the right treatment and educating health professionals on what kind of treatment I need as a woman with a bleeding disorder, because
Right.
a lot of health professionals don't even believe that women can have bleeding disorders, which is pretty ridiculous.
Bogus. Yes.
And I think that also having a child with a bleeding disorder is pretty scary, and continuing the hemophilia in my family.
We found that if you go to the HTC and you talk to them, they'll smooth out a whole lot of things for you. And they usually advocate a lot of things before you go to the hospital, or even while you're at the hospital, ahead of time.
So I think y'all have talked about physical and sexual intimacy incredibly well as emotional intimacy, being there for each other. You were talking about age and intimacy. Do you think they're too old to be intimate?
No.
So spending time together, just being together, and whether it's playing a video game or whether it's being here or whether it's being with your family.
Intellectual, I think one of you was talking about we have the same belief system. Was that
That's it.
right? You know, that really can promote spirituality.
So relationships, they're not just on a single line. They fluctuate all the time. Relationships are not static, they're constantly changing. Constantly moving, changing how our moods go, how our emotions go, what's happening during our life, what happens at church, and what happens medically, what happens financially. Constantly changing. And so it's a challenge.
I guess we did know eventually he would wear out his knees, but each time he goes in the hospital, for me, it's different and it's very, very stressful.
Different how?
Well, now that he's older, well, no, even back then, you know, it just seemed like that's when that fear of a bleed, I thought about that every time he goes in the hospital. And now that he's had 4 new knees, I'm still not used to it. I'm still not used to it. So he's going in again now for his feet.
Yeah, I got bunions and calluses and hammer toes.
So that's gonna happen in a couple of weeks. I'm not as stressed out and fearful of that, but a little bit fearful. Every time he has to be put to sleep for anything. So I really don't like it when he has to have a lot of surgery. And he's had, you know, a new shoulder, 4 new knees.
I got screws and ankles.
What did
You're the
they do?
bionic man.
Yeah, screw his ankle, and he wasn't supposed to move that ankle and never wear a boot.
Yeah,
But
that's
he
what they
came right
say.
out and put on a boot. So I don't know what happened with that.
Well, I gotta ride a motorcycle, and you're hitting the gears, you know, you gotta be able to flex your foot, and the law says you gotta have
Obviously, it
boots
didn't
on
look.
there, you gotta have a helmet and boots on, so I put my boots on, what I did was I got the boots, and I had the shoemaker put a zipper in the back, so I could easily slide them in, and then, but I ride all day long, like 3 chairs.
So again, another good example of sometimes physical limitations and how do you work through that as a couple? How do you gauge your intimacy? You might be on a different level than your spouse. And so it gives you just really good information about, boy, we really need to talk about this more. We need to be on the same page. I'm feeling different about this. You're so laid back, but you've figured out a way how to handle that. Your gauges, if we use this example, your gauges are a lot different, but you guys have figured out a really good way to compromise. So it's an exercise that you can take home with you, and if you want to do that for yourselves and just kind of look at where you are, it's just a really good gauge. What are your gauges saying? What do you want them to say? How do you want to work out any issues that you may have together as couples? So that's really a good segue into opportunities. Talking about concerns can be hard. The elephant says, I'm right in the room and no one even acknowledges me. It's the proverbial elephant in the room.
My wife and I had some problems a few years back. She kind of went through a lot of depression after my son was born, postpartum depression. For the longest time, we wouldn't even talk about the fact she was depressed. And I wasn't helping with it. I mean, I really wasn't. I was making it worse with her. I really was. So, I mean, we never went and saw counseling for it, but we did sit down. We talked about it. Finally, you know, we sat down, we talked about it, and, you know, because I was just making it worse for her because I was being pushy about things. And not on purpose, you know, but I didn't realize I was adding fuel to the fire, making her more and more depressed at the time. So things got better, and then a few years later, she had 2 bad episodes in a row. She went from blood clots and stuff like that in her leg and ended up in the hospital, which scared me to death. And then from there, she ends up having her gallbladder removed. Well, all that happened within a couple of years, but things went completely different that time because we had sat down and we talked about everything. So the first time with the depression, where I just added fuel to the fire. The second time, I guess, you know, we learned from the first time, so we sat down, we talked it out and things like that. So we didn't have the elephant in the room. We were able to talk about it and see where we had made our mistakes, especially me, you know, so we were able to sit down and talk about it, and it went a whole lot better than it did the first time.
Thank you for sharing that, because that is just, it's an incredible example of a challenge that the two of you overcame. Communication is really the key. It's so basic, but it's so incredibly important when you're having a difficult time to sit down and address that elephant in the room. If I get attacked and I get the finger pointed at me, I'm not gonna want to talk. So if you use an I statement and you take responsibility for what you want to talk about, I'm feeling hurt, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling confused, I'm wondering if we could talk about this. Really diffuses all that defensiveness. Because if I point my finger and say, you made me, what's the first thing you want to do? You don't want to talk. And you want to get defensive, and when we get defensive, we get angry. And it shuts everything down, everything.
Well, you catch him like I did, 3 o'clock in the morning. Hey, you know, I want to talk about something. I'm sleep Jerry. Now I got to talk about something of mine.
Ever since I've met him, he doesn't care what time it is. If he wants to talk about something,
It's
He wants
happened.
to talk.
it's happening. It's happening. I just have to wake up. And no use of me saying, Jerry, I've got to get up and go to work. You know, it's 6 o'clock. I always throw that up, but it doesn't mean anything. So I don't do that
You just
anymore.
know.
You don't have that excuse anymore now that you're retired.
You got to talk about it.
So I'm sure you know each other so well after being together so long, what those nonverbal cues are. So if Alice is talking to me, and I put my arms up and I'm not looking at her, rolling, you know, doing the roll of the eyes and sighing, it's like, whatever.
Get in trouble.
So she can read me really well. She can tell that I'm really angry, I don't want to talk, whatever. So how do you guys read each other, and how do you guys talk to each other? How does that work for you guys?
Well, if we're in the meeting, in the middle of a disagreement, the problem with Al is, we don't literally fight, you know? I
Right.
don't
Yeah.
ever remember ever doing that. Al will hit that door. He can.
He just
when
won't
you know,
participate.
Sometimes I would like a heated exchange because we were at 2 different, wavelengths,
Uh-huh.
seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And Al just won't fight with me. He
It's not-
gets up, he goes out,
It's not worth the effort.
open up a book. Oh,
Not
it's
worth
lost
the
in
effort.
books, you know? But that is a problem too, because you're just not, but we never go to bed mad. We have this thing, we never ever do.
So if he walks out, but you
He
don't go to
doesn't-
bed
he
upset,
doesn't
how do
like
you,
confrontation. He
how do
doesn't.
you, somehow, obviously you are able to come together?
Sometimes he will come to his senses, come back into the room and go, okay. And with this real defeated, okay, I guess you can do whatever. Well, a
He's
good
thought
example
about it.
is I wanted a black smoked glass countertop on my bookcase. So I went and had a man come in, do the measuring and the estimate, and the thing came to almost $800. Why the hell do we need this? Okay?
I didn't use
How about I want it? And he goes, no, that's out of the question. So I said, well, okay, let me call the glass company and see if I can get it in a cheaper glass, you know, a smoke glass to match his 65-inch television and his, you know, black marble fireplace. And you know what so
Oh, my
anyway, he came, and so I called the glass company again, so it came in at $500. Totally out of the question. No.
You almost cut it in half.
But here's the problem, sometimes I'll go and I'll just buy it,
She just does it.
and he'll get over it. I mean, you know, once they come and install it, oh well, it's been done. But we don't let things linger.
I do have
think
a
that
hammer.
that's it. You know, he gives his opinion, no, it's out of the question, it's too expensive. okay, I'll go and try
I
to
heard
get,
that.
you know, something less expensive. We're really at a standstill right now because even a less expensive one is really,
Oh, so this is an active issue.
it's gonna be beautiful. It is gonna be beautiful.
How about plexiglass? That's
I
too
just can't get him to see it yet.
Plexiglass.
But you raise a good point. You have learned to negotiate. Very important tool in relationships because you have different perceptions and different needs, different opinions. So learning how to negotiate is
I think
really,
it's
really
good the way it
important.
is.
So an important slide. If you come up to any roadblocks or any barriers, what we call bumps in the road, you know, what do you want? How do you make it happen? And what is stopping you? Communication, negotiation, and really listening to each other is so important in a non-judgmental, non-threatening way. And just how do we get there together? How do we do this together? So do sweat the small stuff because it's all big stuff. So anything, whether it is playing a video game together, whether it's emptying the dishwasher together, whether it's picking out smoked glass, whether it's trying to talk to your wife about depression, it's all big stuff because it all relates to being together, and it's all forms of intimacy. Really important. It's just being together and sharing those moments. So, let's talk a little bit about what we talked about today. Intimacy is always evolving. Again, those gauges, it's never ever static, changes every day based on how we feel. Communication, again, very vital. Talking about the elephants in the room, huge thing. And expressing feelings, expressing what you like, what you don't like. It's hard to do, it can be risky because you don't know how that's going to be perceived. If you run into any roadblocks, your HTC is a great resource for anything that may go on medically, emotionally. Any members of the team there can help out. They're a great resource.
And I hope that this was something that you guys found helpful.
Thanks for participating.